at Neo, Fertiofema, M. On the 5th of April 2006, a federal prison did something it was never supposed to do. It delivered its own most dangerous problem straight to the outside world, shrink-wrapped, forklifted, and stacked like ordinary mail. A man was inside. If you're into true stories that feel impossible, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications right now, because this one is a masterclass in patience, psychology, and how a single calm conversation can beat an entire manhunt. His name was Richard Lee McNair, a convicted murderer with a resume that terrified corrections officers. He had already escaped twice before, from 2 different kinds of facilities, and he had survived long enough on the run to prove he wasn't just impulsive, he was systematic. He didn't rage against the walls. He studied them. He learned where people stopped paying attention, and then he used that blindness like a key. Long before the mailbags, McNair looked like someone you'd trust. He served as a U.S. Air Force Sergeant, polite, controlled, clean-cut. But in North Dakota in the 1980s, he was also breaking into businesses after dark, treating burglary like a side hustle that no one would ever connect to a uniformed man with good manners. Then, in February 1987, the careful life cracked. During a break-in at a grain warehouse office near Manhunt, he was surprised by 2 men. A security guard was shot and survived. A truck driver named Jerry Thease was killed. McNair ran, was caught, and the sentence was essentially a lifelong period at the end of a hallway. 2 consecutive life terms for murder, plus more time stacked on top. No parole, no finish line. For most people, that's where the story stops, because the system is designed for it to stop. McNair's story kept moving. The first escape attempt came fast. While being held at a police station, he managed to get one small item past the restraint's lip balm. It sounds ridiculous until you understand what that means in a room where everyone assumes the cuffs are the end of the discussion. He greased his wrists, twisted, worked one hand free, then the other, and bolted. He didn't even hesitate at the window. He jumped from the 3rd floor, hit the ground, broke bones, and kept going anyway. He lasted only hours before being caught, limping and exhausted. But the lesson was permanent. Speed alone is a gamble. Planning is a weapon. The second escape proved he'd learned. In December 1992, inside the North Dakota State Penitentiary, he and other inmates exploited a ventilation system. It wasn't dramatic in the movie sense. It was slow, unglamorous labor, scraping, loosening, inching forward night after night until the opening was real. Then, in winter darkness, they crawled out, split up, and vanished into the cold. McNair stayed free for months, nearly a year, by living like a moving target. Facial hair on, facial hair off, glasses, different walk, different name, cash work, no attachments. Eventually, he was recognized and arrested. But by then, the state understood what kind of inmate it was dealing with. Not the loud one, the patient one. Over the years that followed, McNair moved through increasingly hard layers of confinement, eventually ending up in the federal system. The Supermax world around Florence, Colorado, where the toughest inmates are kept under extreme restrictions, taught him something else. Sometimes the door isn't the door. Sometimes the exit is a process. So he changed his strategy. Instead of testing fences, he tested people. When he arrived at United States Penitentiary, Pollock, Louisiana, he didn't act like a man preparing to run. He acted like a man who had stopped running. He became the inmate staff want to believe in: calm, cooperative, reliable. He waited for months, then pushed for a work assignment that looked harmless on paper. Pollock had a manufacturing program where inmates repaired old U.S. Postal Service mailbags, heavy canvas sacks that would be stitched up, stacked on pallets, shrink-wrapped, and moved by forklift. Most prisoners see a work detail as time out of a cell. McNair saw logistics. Day after day, he watched the routine: how the bags were stacked, how pallets were wrapped, where they were staged, what time the forklift arrived, and most importantly, what happened after the pallets left the workshop. Some of them were moved to a warehouse outside the main prison fence, waiting for pickup. Outside the fence, a short distance on a map, a completely different universe in reality. He didn't need to defeat razor wire if he could convince the institution to carry him beyond it. The plan wasn't hide in a box. It was build a box no one realizes is a box. According to accounts of the escape, McNair constructed a concealed pod within the mailbags and prepared a breathing tube, because shrink wrap doesn't care how clever you are. He needed air. He needed time. He needed the pallet to look normal under casual eyes. He also needed the moment when attention naturally drops. Lunch. On the morning of the 5th of April 2006, the routine unfolded like a song everyone knew by heart. The workshop emptied as lunch approached. A guard who trusted the model prisoner let him lag behind, and in that small, ordinary gap, McNair moved with the speed of someone who had rehearsed every muscle. He changed out of prison clothing into civilian athletic clothes, something that would make him look like any other man outside. Shorts, tank top, running shoes. He climbed into the cavity he'd built within the pallet of mailbags, curled into a tight position, and pulled the bags back into place above him. The world narrowed to canvas, pressing in on all sides. Plastic overhead, a breathing tube between his teeth, and the sound of machinery. The forklift arrived on schedule. The pallet rose. The pod held. The prison did the most dangerous part for him. It transported him. Investigators and later retellings placed the pallet leaving the prison area in the late morning, with McNair emerging around 11 a.m. after the pallet had been moved to that warehouse beyond the fence. The timing matters because it creates a brutal truth about escape. Sometimes the best security collapses during the most predictable hour of the day. Sight. Turn 1. Search. 0. When the warehouse workers disappeared for lunch, McNair used a hidden blade to cut through the shrink wrap from the inside. He didn't sprint the instant he was free. He listened. He waited. Then he slipped out, walked toward the open world like a man who belonged there, and finally ran into the trees. By the time anyone noticed the torn plastic and scattered bags, the clock had already betrayed them. A head count confirmed it. McNair was gone. Sirens, roadblocks, helicopters, everything that looks powerful on TV came online after the only thing that really matters in a chase, the head start. And then came the moment that made the entire escape feel supernatural. Not long after, a police officer in Louisiana spotted a man on the roadside who resembled the alert description. The officer stopped him. This was the kind of encounter that ends most escapes before they become legends. You can outsmart a camera for a minute. You can't outsmart a human who is staring directly at you, unless that's exactly what you're best at. McNair didn't run. He didn't argue. He talked. He presented a calm story. He was a construction worker in the area, out for a jog. He kept the tone friendly, normal, almost boring, the kind of energy that makes suspicion feel rude. In various accounts, the officer's name is given as Carl Bordelon, and the stop is remembered as the conversation that saved McNair's freedom. He was let go. Hours later, the officer learned he had just spoken to the fugitive everyone was hunting. Sight turn 0 search 0 search 2 0 search 2 0 search 2. That wasn't luck alone. It was understanding the psychology of certainty. Most people, when they're nervous, perform nervousness. McNair performed normalcy. Once he was out of that immediate net, he began moving like someone who knew the second act would be harder than the first. His face was now public property. The man who mailed himself out headline traveled fast. He couldn't blend in for long inside the United States, so he pushed north toward Canada. Authorities would later say he crossed the border in the weeks after the escape, and in British Columbia he ditched vehicles, used false identities, and kept shifting. There was even an early near catch. Canadian police approached a suspicious stolen vehicle, and McNair ran fast enough to disappear into woods before they could pin him down. Reports from the time describe him fleeing and slipping away again, leaving behind evidence that hinted at how carefully he was tracking himself. Maps, fake identification, even a camera with photos of him in different looks. Sight turn 0 search 3, turn 0 search 1, 2. For the next year and a half, he lived the fugitive's version of exile, moving through huge spaces where distance itself is a kind of camouflage. He traveled across Canada, shifting between cities and remote areas, using stolen cars and changing plates, sleeping in cheap motels or out in the open when he had to. Some later summaries describe him as almost methodical in avoiding confrontation, stealing to survive, but not escalating. That didn't erase his original violence, but it explains why his story fascinates people who study escapes. He wasn't trying to win a fight on the road. He was trying to avoid every fight entirely. And the longer he stayed free, the more his myth grew. The U.S. Marshals listed him among their most wanted fugitives. His face circulated through broadcasts and bulletins. The search stretched across borders, agencies, and seasons. It's easy to imagine a mastermind ending like a movie, an ambush, a siege, a dramatic showdown. It ended like real life often ends, at a random checkpoint. On the 25th of October 2007, in New Brunswick, Canada, police stopped a vehicle as part of a routine traffic check. The driver's identity didn't add up. Suspicions rose. McNair ran, but the chase was short. He was taken into custody near Campbellton, and officials later confirmed he was the same fugitive who had escaped Pollock in April 2006. The capture was announced publicly that day by Canadian authorities, who noted he had been on the run since the prison escape and was arrested following a traffic stop. Site turn 0 search 1. Turn 0 search 1. 5/. 18 months of movement ended by an ordinary question and a badge. After his arrest, McNair was extradited back to the United States and returned to maximum security federal custody. For years he was held in the Florence, Colorado complex, including time at ADX Florence, the Supermax facility built for people the government does not want taking chances. Later updates indicate he was transferred out of ADX in November 2022 and has since been held at other high-security federal institutions. Some recent summaries list him as incarcerated at USP McCreary in Kentucky. Site turn 1 search 0, turn 1 search 4. It's tempting to turn a story like this into admiration. Don't. McNair's ingenuity didn't cancel the fact that a man died in 1987 and another was shot. What his escape does prove coldly, clearly, is that systems fail in the spaces where routine becomes comfort. A shrink-wrapped pallet doesn't look like a threat when you've seen 10,000 shrink-wrapped pallets. A good inmate doesn't look like a risk when the paperwork says he's stable. A jogger doesn't look like a fugitive when he speaks like your neighbor. That's why McNair's mailbag escape is still taught and retold. Not because it's cute, but because it's terrifyingly practical. It used the institution's own workflow as the tunnel. It used lunch as cover. It used social engineering as camouflage. And it turned one man's patience into a full-scale security overhaul. Because after Pollock, facilities tightened procedures around shipping areas, tool control, and work details near perimeters, exactly the kinds of boring places where people stop expecting trouble. Site turn 1 search 0 1 turn 0 search 6 place. Somewhere behind high walls, McNair lives with the consequences of the life he chose. The violence that put him there, the escapes that made him infamous, and the reality that, eventually, every run ends. But on that April morning in 2006, for a few hours, a federal prison shipped a man out like cargo, and the world learned a lesson that never gets old. You don't always break out by breaking things. Sometimes you break out by being overlooked. What makes McNair especially unsettling isn't just the mechanics, it's the way he treated incarceration like a long game. He didn't gamble on a single wild sprint. He invested. He observed who counted bodies and who assumed someone else had already counted. He learned which tools disappeared without paperwork and which ones triggered a search. He noticed how quickly a security procedure turns into a habit, and how habits turn into blind spots. Even the simplest objects became part of his toolkit. A breathing tube fashioned from plastic, a razor blade small enough to hide, a set of ordinary clothes that would read as jogger instead of inmate. The warehouse outside the fence wasn't a miracle loophole. It was a logistical seam. The prison still controlled the inside perimeter. But the moment those pallets moved to a staging area beyond the main fence, responsibility blurred. Not guards, not prisoners, just a work site doing work. That gray zone is where he slipped through. Years later, the fascination didn't fade. A Canadian crime reporter named Byron Christopher, based in the same New Brunswick area connected to McNair's capture, started writing to him. And McNair replied, offering details and reflections that filled in gaps the public never saw. Those letters and reporting eventually became a full book-length account, and they're part of why the story keeps resurfacing. Because McNair, unlike many fugitives, was willing to dissect his own methods once the run was over. Site turn 1 search 0 turn 1 search 4 turn 0 search 7. That post-capture reflection also highlights something most retellings gloss over. Escape artistry is not just engineering. It's identity management. McNair didn't merely change outfits, he changed how he occupied space. When he wanted to be invisible, he chose environments where nobody asks questions. Highways, work zones, motels, campgrounds, rail lines, parking lots. When he had to face someone directly, he didn't look like he was getting away with it. He acted like the encounter was an inconvenience for both of them, like the officer was doing his job and he, naturally, was cooperating. That's why the roadside stop in Louisiana is so chilling. Imagine being the officer. You're hearing radio alerts, you're scanning faces, you're trying to match a description, and then you meet someone who makes suspicion feel embarrassing. McNair didn't win by being smarter in a textbook sense. He won by being smoother than the moment could handle. In the end, the checkpoint in New Brunswick worked because it removed his favorite weapon, the ability to control the narrative. A fixed lane, direct questions, a process that doesn't care about charm. The government press release about his arrest was almost blunt in its simplicity, taken into custody after a traffic stop. On the run since April 2006. No mythology, no romance, just the paperwork of a manhunt finally closing. Site turn 0. Search 1. And if you want more stories where one decision, one weakness, or one quiet plan changes everything, stick around. The next unbelievable escape is always hiding in plain sight.